Welcome to this weekend in Tromsø, photo share and story tell. I love to tell the stories that go along with my photographs. And this weekend, this September weekend in 2016 was a very special one. I had long wanted to visit Tromsø, and it was a goal also for my son to visit the city. So we both wanted to go. We each had slightly different ideas of what was a must-see there. He absolutely had to see the Polar Museum. I absolutely had to see the Sámi exhibition at the University Museum. And we both wanted to go to take the cable car up to Storsteinen Ledge. That was a goal of both of us. So there was sufficient overlap that we could do it together and that we could, both of us, enjoy all of the things that each wanted to do, because I was interested in the Polar Museum too. He was interested in the Sámi Museum. So it worked well. We wanted to allow sufficient time that we could just amble and take our time and also relax in the nature. And if we came across somewhere that we really, really liked, we could, pop that into the itinerary as well. So it was with that in mind that we arranged to stay from Friday lunchtime through to the Monday morning. To get reasonably priced flights from Iceland, we had to travel at 1 o'clock in the morning and have a lengthy wait at Oslo airport. But that was okay. David's probably slept more than I did. I did sleep a little on each flight, but what with the excitement and everything, it didn't really matter. So we arrived in beautiful sunshine, took the coach into Tromsø from Tromsø airport, which isn't a long ride. And the road actually takes you through a tunnel under the mountains and under the forest, which was pretty amazing way to preserve nature when you think about it and facilitate transportation at the same time. We then got to our hotel, which was just a little walk up the hill, the Ami Hotel, very, very nice rooms, all painted white, very comfortable, spacious, well furnished. There was even a fridge in the rooms. Not that either of us used it. So we were ready to set off out into the sunshine. And the first image that I'm sharing here is actually the image from the top of the Fjellheisen Cable Car ride. And that was our first goal of the day, but we had other things to see along the way. So without further ado, I will move on. Let's see if I can. Doesn't really want to. There we are. That's much better. Sometimes they're difficult to start these for some reasons, these PowerPoints. So our first excursion took us back into the city and across Tromsdalen, the bridge from Tromsø to Tromsdalen and to Tromsdalen Kirke, which is the building you see the other side of the bridge with the white, you can see the white apex, triangular apex of the roof. But many people call this building, and all tourists seem to refer to it as the Arctic Cathedral. It's even described that way in some guidebooks, but it isn't a cathedral, but it is no less stunning for that. There is a cathedral in Tromsø, and that is a very traditional church building that is also very beautiful. And so to Tromsdalen Kirke. The outside perhaps doesn't look quite as impressive when you get close to it as you think it will. It's very nice, and it's bigger than it appears in the photograph. It is quite tall, but going inside, it was just amazing. because the roof is in steps, and I hadn't realized until I got inside, that there were like windows between each step section. So the light comes in, and I can only begin to imagine how wonderful that must be in the winter when the northern lights are soaring overhead. It must be absolutely glorious. And a word on the northern lights. They do appear quite often in Tromsø, more often than they do in Iceland. You can see them. We went at the beginning of September, and you can sometimes see them then. We didn't, but you would have to be up fairly late to do that because you need darkness to see them. But throughout the winter, you do have a better chance of seeing the northern lights in Tromsø or anywhere in northern Norway than you do in Iceland. But you can see them in either place if you get lucky, and they're not guaranteed in either place either. But I just loved being in this church because the way the light fell made it so special. And from the church, we walked up to the Fjellheisen Cable Car station. That was our next port of call. But of course, along the way, you're walking uphill all the time. We had to keep turning round to look at the views, and just couldn't resist taking this photograph with the mountains sitting dreamily in the background. And this was one of the reasons why we wanted to allow plenty of time, because we both know of our propensity to stop along the way and just do what we want to do whilst keeping our eye on the overall plan. So we factor that in. But this was such a beautiful sight. And really, it's just one grandstand view after another when you're on the cable car. There isn't a dull minute. And my advice would be, if there are two of you, for one of you to take the photographs going up and the other to take the photographs going down. So each of you gets the opportunity to fully focus on the views rather than having to wonder what it is that you're captivating. Although it would be very hard to take a bad photograph of these views. It just would be very hard unless you drop the camera, shake the camera, or have your finger over the lens. I don't think it's possible to do it. But this was one of the more outstanding views. And Tromsø is the other side of the bridge. Tromsø is a city that is surrounded by many islands, and a lot of people don't think of that, but it is actually a city. It's fairly small with 71,000 people, but at the same time, it has the full status of a city. It has a university. It has really the facilities, I would say, of a small city. And so to Storsteinen Ledge, which is the destination point of the cable car. And this area has many walking trails. You can walk to the highest peak in the area if you want to. If you wanted to spend several hours walking in the mountains, you could follow the different trails. I would recommend being properly equipped for that rather than just in leisure clothes as we were. But it was not our intention to hike, just really to walk a bit, and we were never far from shelter. But one of the more wonderful sights was watching the kite surfers, and they seemed to take forever prepping themselves, and they're checking everything and making sure all their equipment was in order, to the point where we actually wondered if we would see one of them take off. But we soon did, and he soared like a bird, soon to be joined by other colourful kite surfers. And that was such a graceful sight and really, really beautiful. We did do a little bit of walking in this area, and there's also a seats in various places where you could just sit. And yes, we did our fair share of that as well. But it was a perfect, I think probably we spent about 90 minutes just enjoying that part. And by then it was early evening, and we decided to go and have a meal at the cafe, because there's the Fjellheisen Cafe House, and that offered simple fare, but very good quality. And it's a proper mountain lodge, very welcoming. And I didn't have any of the alcohol because I think it would just have put me to sleep. So alongside my delicious shrimp salad and bread and butter, I just had a cup of really good coffee. But there's alcohol, there's fuller meals for people that want them. But it's a fairly straightforward menu. I suppose fairly typical of mountain lodge type cafes, but very beautiful. The interior was spacious with big windows so you can see everything. And by the end of that time, I was starting to feel a little bit tired, but still looking forward to making the most of the journey back. And this was what I photographed on the journey back, this beautiful view of the fjord. And as you can see, the far horizon has disappeared into a haziness, and the temperature actually dropped about 6 centigrade whilst we were in the cafe, because of course that does happen a lot. It does tend to happen that way in late summer, early autumn. You get these bigger temperature changes more often, but it felt dreamy to see it that way. So I was glad to have that experience. And overall, with the cable car journey and the walk across the bridge, it must have taken us about 45, maybe 50 minutes to get back to the guest house. And I was having to push myself a little bit just to get up the hill, because it had been a very long day with little sleep. But I was very happy tired, if I can put it that way. And so after a beautiful sleep that was really restful, I think I slept between about 9:30 and 7:30 in the morning, and then a nice breakfast in the hotel. And we were off for our second day, for which we had a triplicate of different things planned, but we actually finished up fitting something else in as well. So our first goal was to see the Botanical Gardens, which claim to be, and I'm pretty sure they are, the most northerly botanical gardens in the world. I know that at one time, Akureyri would claim the same for their botanical gardens, and I think that was so when they started them, but these are definitely further north than Akureyri now. They are 217 miles into the Arctic Circle, whereas Akureyri is not on the Arctic Circle. It's about probably 40 miles away, I would say. That's a guess, but that's what I think it is. So these gardens have a unique claim to fame, as well as being very beautiful. And the walk to them probably took us about 50 minutes from the centre of Tromsø. We did have time wandering around the city first, because we wanted to get to know it a bit. And then probably about 11, we walked out and came to the gardens just before midday. And David's in a t-shirt here because by then it was hot. It was 20 degrees. But the gardens were still in good shape, even though it was September. The trees were just starting to turn golden. The flowers were not exactly at their best, but the Alpine plants were still very good, still very impressive. So this is still a good time to go, although I would have to say that it varies year by year, and a week later, snow came. So the garden would have been very different then. The cafe that you see in the picture wasn't open, but it closes in September, at the end of August, I think. But they very kindly leave their garden furniture out. So we were able to sit there with the food that we'd brought with us and enjoy a little picnic before our walk back into the city. And our second goal of the day was to go to Kvaløya, to a place called Eidkjosen. But we took the bus towards Eidkjosen. We'd got on the bus that we needed, but it went through other parts of Kvaløya, this beautiful island that is reached by a bridge from Tromsø. When we were traveling across Kvaløya, we decided it was so wonderful that we just had to get off the bus and have a walk around and then get on another one an hour later. So that's what we did. We don't know the name of this place because it's literally just somewhere where we got off on the spur of the moment to explore the nature. And we spent an hour here. And then we got back on the bus and went on to our original destination, Eidkjosen, which is such a real beauty spot. I had read about this place, and that was one of the places that I really wanted to go to. And so we did, but we took a little detour first, and we still had enough time to explore this place. And everywhere has got its own character, although in a way. And it was just glorious. We stopped for a cup of coffee. It's quite remote, but at the same time, there are facilities. There was a really good supermarket with a cafe where we could have a coffee and just wander and enjoy everything. And I've got to say, the little bus station is the most beautifully situated bus station I've ever come across, because it is surrounded by such stunning beauty that, waiting a few minutes for a bus or even longer is an absolute treat, because you can just admire everything around you. And I think the name should be pronounced Kvaløya. There are a lot of oyas in this area because oya means islands, and there's so many islands in I suppose you'd call it an archipelago from Tromsø. And many of them are reached by bridges, not all of them. And Kvaløya means Whale Island, which is rather charming and rather nice. Interestingly, although it's spelt differently, the Icelandic word for whale is kvala. So they're pronounced, that they are virtually the same word. And that was just a very enjoyable time. But then our third goal of the day, which is now the fourth goal because we had an extra stop, was to go out to this beautiful area called Telegragbukta, and I've spelt it wrongly there, it should be Telegraph. And this is the beautiful sandy beach. But to get there, we took the bus back into Tromsø, and then we took another very short bus ride out to Telegragbukta. We could have walked, it's only about a half-hour walk from the city, but we wanted to see what we wanted to see, where we wanted to see it. So we saved time by taking transport. We didn't hire a car because everything that we wanted to see was in easy reach, either by walking, taking the cable car, or taking a short bus ride. So it wouldn't have, there wouldn't have been much point to it. But I know that some people would like to hire a car, pick it up from the airport and use it for their weekend. And of course you could do that. There were parking places everywhere we went. But to come back to this silvery sanded beach, this in a way reminded me of some of the coves off the coast of Cornwall, some of the coves around Cornwall, where there are forested areas as well, although the varieties of trees here are a little bit different. But it did bring that to mind, and it was warm enough for people to swim. There were some people swimming. We didn't photograph them in the water, but they seemed to be happy and comfortable. Of course, the ocean is cold in this part of the world, but it has got as warm as it's going to get by early September. I did go in for a paddle And I've got to say, I thought it was quite comfortable. I enjoyed it, but I was only in up to my knees. And then we headed on a little walk through the forest, again at Telegragbukta, this time spelt correctly. So we enjoyed that, and we also enjoyed sitting there. And again, it was one of those times when you wanted to not just to walk the path, but to actually be and absorb the atmosphere and feel what you feel when you're there and be a part of it. And again, that's one of the reasons why when I planned this, I wanted to plan it enough leisure time to fit around the things that we knew we actually wanted to do, because we know that both of us are like this. We like to indulge a whim if it comes along, and if something shows up that we want to do, we want to be able to go with it, and we'd allowed scope for that. So then it was a quick trip back to Tromsø, and again we took the bus and then headed back up to the Sámi hotel, and it's reached by quite steep steps. So I would say that it's only really suitable for people that can walk uphill or that have a car, because the journey is uphill all the way from the city centre. It's fine, absolutely fine for us, and it's a very pleasant walk. But if anybody struggled with hills, it wouldn't really be for them. Although you can park near the hotel, so if you have a car, it's not a worry. So this was coming back for the evening, and then it was time to kind of go over the day and just enjoy a glass of red wine. This time I was able to have a drink because I wasn't in danger of falling asleep. It had been a full day, but it was a beautiful day, so tranquil, and I was the opposite of tired, just invigorated by everything that I'd seen. But it was nice to relax for an hour before we went out to dinner at the Mart Hallin or Hollin. It's a food hall. Mart is literally food, and it's a food hall that was on one side like a farmer's deli, I suppose we would call it, very good quality organic produce, and a restaurant on the other. And it definitely lived up to expectations. We were very fortunate to be able to get a table. We were only able to do that because other people had cancelled. I don't actually have any photographs inside the restaurant because the interior had extremely subdued lighting. There was enough light to see what you were eating, don't get me wrong, but neither my camera nor my son's camera would take decent photographs in this restaurant, unfortunately. But we had a lovely meal. It was leisurely. The waiters were attentive. And just a word about the cost of eating out in Norway. If you compare like with like, I would say it's a little bit cheaper than Iceland. And I would also say that unless you're in London, it's more expensive than England. However, the quality of the produce was very good. And if you want the kind of meal where you just, where it's cheap and you just have chips with everything, you can do that. And it won't be as cheap as it would be in England, but it would be a lot cheaper than eating in a proper restaurant. And we really enjoyed that and made the most of the day. And then we had day 2 to look forward to, or our second full day. We could say it was day 3 because we arrived on the Friday, but our second full day. And this was the day we decided to set aside for the museums, really, because weather-wise, this was not going to be the best day. So we waited to go to them, to do things that were inside. We saved them for the Sunday. And I started the day with a little meditation in the Roald Amundsen Memorial Garden, which was very peaceful. And birds came and joined me. I could hear the wind whistling through the trees. And I really like to meditate or do a little mind journey with the sounds of nature guiding me. And I was able to do that. You know, I did wonder if other people would come along. And whilst I don't mind people seeing me meditating, obviously if there's a lot of conversation or something, it's a distraction. But it was fine. Nobody else came along. I had the garden all to myself. Admittedly, it was quite early in the day. And then it was back to the hotel for a nice breakfast. They served breakfast, but if you wanted to, you could use their kitchen. And to come back to the kind of accommodation they offered, the rooms, as I say, were very bright, and there were little seating areas on each level of the hotel. And each of these also had a desk with a computer. So if you needed to check up on some information, you didn't have to faff around on your phone. You could do it on using a nice wide screen. And I think everything was very well provided for. Even though this was a budget hotel, I can highly recommend it. And so the next stop of the day was my longed-for visit to the Tromsø University Museum and the Sámi exhibition. And the exhibition concentrated principally on the Sámi of northern Norway, those that were indigenous to that region, rather than the Sámi of northern Finland or Sweden or Russia's Kola Peninsula, because the Sámi have been an oppressed people. They were oppressed greatly. Their language was almost obliterated. Their way of life was not respected. And the Sámi are a group really that spread over 4 national boundaries with 4 parliaments. So it's only really possible for the exhibition to talk in detail about the local people and their battle and how they used their own culture, their own art to, in a way, spearhead their battle for recognition, to have their ways of life, their culture, their beliefs, their shamanic beliefs, their reindeer herding, given proper recognition within Norway. And moving towards that goal, they were able to establish their own parliament, which coexists with the regular parliament of Norway. I don't know what the power interplay is between them. I have no idea. Obviously, the mainstream parliament is uppermost, but certainly the Sámi people have a voice through their parliament, and they even have a representative at the United Nations. So great headway has been made, even though much more is needed. And one of the things at the moment that the people are struggling with is that they can see it being a problem now and in the upcoming years is the conflict over natural resources, because there are natural resources in what was traditionally Sámi territory. And of course, there's a big drive to exploit those resources. So the battles on that are likely to be ongoing, but it was more inspiring than anything else, the way changes had been made and learning a little bit more about their culture. For example, I didn't know before I went there that the designs on the very elaborate designs on the traditional costumes actually have a relationship to different families. And that, that was news to me. And I also discovered something quite precious to take away with me. I found out about the work of the activist and singer Mari Boine, and I'd never heard of her, even though she is internationally known, and it's the sort of music that I like. I had never come across her work at all, and yet through this place I did. and I was able to follow up on it. And I find listening to her songs on YouTube so inspiring, even though, most of the time she doesn't sing in English. In fact, I don't know that I've heard anything in English, but it doesn't matter that I can't hear the words, because there is a deep power, a deep surge of power that somehow comes through what she is doing and radiates out. And I cannot fail to feel strengthened and invigorated whenever I listen to Marie Boyner sing. But her story is even more inspiring as an activist, as someone that was at the spearhead of the fight for changes, the fight for greater recognition, which is ongoing. But I so loved this place. I wrote so many notes that at the end I felt my hand would drop off if I wrote any more. And my writing got pretty scrawly, although I can read it, so it doesn't matter. But I could easily have viewed everything again. As it was, I spent 2.5 or 3 hours, and I saw everything. I definitely saw everything that there was to see whilst I was there. And then it was on to the next place, and we had a quick lunch. We actually had lunch at the museum, which was very nice. I think we just had little pancakes or something, but it was very nice. And then it was off to the Polar Museum and the bright red house. So David's must-see was kind of the objective for the afternoon, although I loved it too, especially the building, although I love all of the Norwegian buildings. And we have actually got quite a few of these buildings in Iceland because they were created and then shipped across to Iceland. And there's quite a few of them in Akureyri, in Seyðisfjörður, in Reykjavik, in different places. But of course, in Norway, you see a lot more Norwegian buildings for obvious reasons. But this one was pretty special, and the exhibits were pretty special as well. There were lots of original exhibits from the expeditions, everything from the clothing, letters, logs, a few of which were translated into English, not very many, the equipment. It was just amazing how these people did what they did with what they had to wear and the equipment. Because if you imagine wearing woolen clothes, if you imagine no Gore-Tex, none of the kind of boots that we wear now, it must have been such a struggle, and at times so uncomfortable. For the indigenous peoples, of course, they had traditional clothing that didn't need modern day materials, but it seems that the explorers, they would use some of the kind of clothing that the indigenous people would use, but they would also use woolen clothing and that sort of thing, which probably wasn't ideal. It can't have been, but they were such hardy folk, so determined to do what they did. And I didn't realize how many expeditions of the polar expeditions actually took off from Tromsø, because even those that in the end went from Svalbard, they started in Tromsø before they went to Svalbard. So Tromsø was really an expedition centre. And then there was the section with the models from the olden days, the models of reindeer herders, and of course they are present day people too, battling to keep their way of life alive. But if you look at this here, the models were almost as lifelike as we were. If they'd been moving, it would have been hard to see that they were not alive. They were as real as that. And I so loved it. David loved it, and I loved it, I think, equally as much, to be honest. he was not one for scribbling oodles of notes, but he did take a lot of photographs. And then it was our final evening. So by then we had windy and wild conditions. We had an hour to spare, so we went back into the city just to get a last taste of it and wander around. And it is a beautiful city, right on the waterfront, absolutely gorgeous. And we went in a few like commercial galleries and just enjoyed ourselves before we went back to the guest house and got ready for an evening meal, where we went to another restaurant that had excellent quality food, although I would say the service was a bit slow. But the lighting was even more subdued, if anything, in this restaurant. So again, no photographs, but talking over the weekend as we sat eating, we were talking about our best memories. And with everything that I saw, I would say that my best memory was of walking at Storsteinen. And I can't really say why. It was just wonderful to do that and to stroll and to feel in a way as though I was on the top of the world, although, of course, in world terms, 420 meters isn't very high, is it? It's only less than half of Mount Snowdon, where I have stood on the top of Mount Snowdon. But it felt like I was on the roof of the world, with all these vistas stretching out, the bridges, the islands. And that for me was the absolute highlight in a weekend of many highlights. I hope you are able to get to see Tromsø, if it is your desire to do so. Thank you for joining me.